On behalf of this and past governments and the many public authorities who let you down, I want to reiterate an unequivocal apology for the unimaginable pain and suffering that you have suffered and the failure of our country's institutions through decades to prevent that harm and keep you safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will update the House on the audit the Government commissioned from Baroness Secy on child sexual exploitation and grooming gangs, and on the action we are taking to tackle this vile crime, to put perpetrators behind bars and to provide the innocent victims of those crimes with support and justice. The House will be aware that on Friday, 7 men were found guilty of the most horrendous crimes in Rochdale between 2000 and 2006. They were convicted of treating teenage girls as sex slaves, repeatedly raping them in filthy flats, alleyways and warehouses. The perpetrators included taxi drivers and market traders of Pakistani heritage, and it has taken 20 years to bring them to justice. I want to pay tribute to the incredible bravery of the women who told their stories and have fought for justice through all those years. They should never have been let down for so long. The sexual exploitation of children by grooming gangs is one of the most horrific crimes. Children as young as 10 plied with drugs and alcohol, brutally raped by gangs of men and disgracefully let down again and again by the authorities who were meant to protect them and keep them safe. And these despicable crimes have caused the most unimaginable harm to victims and survivors throughout their lives and are a stain on our society. After I asked police forces in January to identify cases involving grooming and child sexual exploitation allegations that had been closed with no further action, more than 800 cases have now been identified for formal review, and I expect that figure to rise above 1,000 in the coming weeks. Let me be clear. Perpetrators of these vile crimes should be off our streets, behind bars, and paying the price for what they have done. I told Parliament in January I expected Baroness Secy to deliver the same kind of impactful and no-holds-barred report that she produced on Rotherham in 2015, so we never shy away from the reality of these terrible crimes. And I am very grateful to Louise and her team that they have done exactly that, with a hugely wide-ranging assessment conducted in just 4 months. The findings of her audit are damning. At its heart, she identifies a deep-rooted failure to treat children as children, a continued failure to protect children and teenage girls from rape, from exploitation and serious violence, and from the scars that last a lifetime. She finds too much fragmentation in the authorities' response, too little sharing of information, too much reliance on flawed data, too much denial, too little justice, too many criminals getting off, too many victims being let down. The audit describes victims as young as 10, often those in care, or children with learning or physical disabilities, being singled out for grooming precisely because of their vulnerability. Perpetrators still walking free because no one joined the dots, or because the law ended up protecting them instead of the victims that they had exploited. Deep-rooted institutional failures, stretching back decades where organisations who should have protected children and punished offenders looked the other way. And Baroness Secy found blindness, ignorance, prejudice, defensiveness, and even good but misdirected intentions all played a part in this collective failure. And on the key issues of ethnicity that I'd asked her to examine, she has found continued failure to gather proper, robust national data, despite concerns being raised going back very many years. In the local data that the audit examined from 3 police forces, they identify clear evidence of over-representation among suspects of Asian and Pakistani heritage men. And she refers to examples of organisations avoiding the topic altogether for fear of appearing racist or raising community tensions. These findings are deeply disturbing, but most disturbing of all, as Baroness Secy makes clear, is the fact that too many of these findings are not new, but too little has changed. We have lost more than a decade. That must end now. Yeah. Baroness Secy sets out 12 recommendations for change. We will take action on all of them immediately because we cannot afford more wasted years. So we will introduce new laws to protect children and support victims so they stop being blamed for the appalling crimes committed against them. Yeah. New major police operations to pursue perpetrators and put them behind bars. New national inquiry to direct local investigations and hold institutions to account for past failures, new ethnicity data and research so we face up to the facts on exploitation and abuse, new action across children's services and other agencies to identify children at risk, and further action to support child victims and tackle the new forms of exploitation and abuse online. Taken together, this will mark the biggest programme of work ever pursued to root out the scourge of grooming gangs and child sexual exploitation. So we will change the law to ensure that adults who engage in penetrative sex with a child under 16 face the most serious charge of rape. And we will work closely with the CPS and the police to ensure there are safeguards for consensual teenage relationships. We will change the law so that those convicted for child prostitution offences, while their rapists got off scot-free, will have their convictions disregarded and their criminal records expunged. Baroness Casey's next recommendation is a national criminal operation. As I've set out, arrests and investigations are rising, but the audit recommends us going further. So I can announce the police will launch a new national criminal operation into grooming gangs, overseen by the National Crime Agency, bringing together for the first time all arms of the policing response, and will develop a rigorous new national operating model which all forces across the country will be able to adopt. Mr. Speaker, I warned in January that the data collection we had inherited from the previous government on ethnicity was completely inadequate. It was only collected on 37% of suspects. Baroness Casey's audit confirms that ethnicity data is not recorded for 2/3 of grooming gang perpetrators, and she says it is not good enough to support any statements about the ethnicity of group-based child sexual exploitation offenders at the national level. I agree with that conclusion, and frankly it is ridiculous and helps no one that this basic information is not collected, especially when there have been warnings and recommendations stretching back 13 years about the woefully inadequate data on perpetrators which prevents patterns of crime being understood and tackled. The vast majority of people in our British, Asian and Pakistani heritage communities continue to be appalled by these terrible crimes and agree that the criminal minority of sick predators and perpetrators in every community must be dealt with robustly by the criminal law. Baroness Casey's review also identifies prosecutions and investigations into perpetrators who are white, British, European, African or Middle Eastern, just as Alexis Jay's inquiry concluded that all ethnicities and communities were involved in appalling child abuse crimes. So to provide accurate information to help tackle serious crimes, we will make it a formal requirement for the first time to collect both ethnicity and nationality data for all cases of child sexual abuse and exploitation. But let me make clear, those who groom children or who commit sexual offences will not be granted asylum in the UK. We will do everything in our power to remove them. I do not believe the law is strong enough that we have inherited, so we are bringing forward a change to the law so that anyone convicted of sexual offences is excluded from the asylum system and denied refugee status. We've already increased the removal of foreign national offenders by 14% since the election, and we're drawing up new arrangements to identify and remove those who have committed a much wider range of offences. On behalf of this and past governments and the many public authorities who let you down, I want to reiterate an unequivocal apology for the unimaginable pain and suffering that you have suffered, and the failure of our country's institutions through decades to prevent that harm and keep you safe.